Well, this first meeting in March '58 was the starting point, but not the formal one. The formal foundation of the AO was then, a few months later, in the city of Bienne, which is in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. And then there we decided, yes, we go for it, and we would take up a closed pathology department in Davos and transform it into a research lab. And everybody had to pay 500 francs, which then was a sizable amount of money, and they all paid. And that was the foundation of the start of this establishment of the AO. Then naturally we had one principle. We would not give our instruments away. We would not sell them. And that is probably the best psychological sales trick we ever had. Mean people said so. Anyway, we wanted people not to put things in disrepute by using it wrongly. Therefore we said you can only buy the instrument if you come to a course. And that was in, then the first course, I think it was in '61. My contribution was probably more from the soft tissue handling. I have been a tissue culture during many years, and I thought I was on good terms with the cells who should provide wound healing. And so between Maurice Müller and myself, I think we had a very, very fruitful collaboration. I learned from him, he learned a little bit from me. And then naturally, Willenecker was a absolute convinced missionary, a teacher, and that was his main function in this initial endeavor. It was naturally somewhat unexpected that this relatively young group, or we even call it immature, would come along and say to everybody, you are on the wrong track. We know how we should do. Well, that's how it started, and we didn't actually not anticipate the international impact which that endeavor has really had. And nowadays it is really so that worldwide the basic ideas are realized not always with our armamentarium, but the basic idea of immediate fixation and early function has been applied in many parts of the world. And I think that is probably the important element which we have been contributed.
I felt it was very difficult to step into this organization which I'd been part of, but never in the leadership role other than to run that meeting in Toronto, and to try and make an impact on future directions based on what we had accomplished in our 1989 meeting. All the things we just talked about, the globalization of the academic side, the integration of all the surgeons of the world, but on a geographic basis. And I think overcoming that resistance was a great challenge. Taking over from the icon of the AO, one of the two big icons, Martin Allgauer, who was the founding president of the AO Foundation, was somewhat daunting and awesome for me. And that was the year that the AO Center in Davos was finished. And receiving the keys to that building from Martin Allgauer at the large banquet we had at that meeting. There was a huge tent, it was outdoors, and receiving the keys as the first non-Swiss president of the AO Foundation was a great highlight to begin my presidency.
The greatest challenge was to reach the best decision and results possible. The highlight of my presidency was the exact and continuous information about all necessary decisions from Davos and worldwide.
The greatest challenge of my presidency was to understand the culture of the inner workings of the foundation. I felt when I became president, or even just before my presidency, that the culture was in a stage of transition, and certain practices which had been culturally and ethically acceptable at the beginning of the foundation were no longer entirely applicable in a new climate of transparency of governance. The thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that I was able to maintain the dignity of the presidency and the respect of the trustees for the office of the president.
Our producer partners were told at the time by EU authorities that they had to renegotiate the contract of 1992, that it was illegal in many respects. And I was to chair the negotiating committee, completely untrained in any commercial dealings. My personal achievement was in keeping the foundation together, in as much as AO Spine wanted to fragment. They did not want to stay in the group. They felt that they had nothing in common with trauma surgeons, that they were preeminently reconstructive, spinal orthopedic surgeons. And we had to find a solution. And the solution that I was able to come up with was the creation of specialty boards, through which they could see an autonomous, to a degree, governance of their specialty.
Well, the greatest challenge that I had was unfortunately a very negative one, because just at that time we had problems in the operational management, which took all my energy, and even worse, we had a medical group that was divided into two camps, I might say so, and this really took just about the whole time of my presidency to solve the problem, which was at the end, fortunately, possible. Well, I think if I'm talking about highlights, I think you have to remember that I was president of the educational institution that was called AO International at that time for quite some years. And therefore, during my presidency of the AO Foundation, I intensified my activities in education in the different areas of the world, and also tried to support the recently formed groups in AO East Asia as well as in Latin America, and also worked on a conceptually started educational activity in China. And also the education content actually changed a little from the technically orientated activities with the practical exercises to a more comprehensive look at the patient's need, and that we had to follow in education just as well.
My greatest challenge was to mediate a conflict which was existing at that moment within the AO. My greatest achievements have probably be the fact that I could unify those two different groups within the AO.
The greatest challenge during my presidency was the ongoing negotiations between the Foundation and Synthase to establish a new viable contract. During this 2-year period, we had some intense negotiations, and it was interesting to go through this process, but ultimately we were able to come up with a contract, and we were able to sign the first part of that, which was the transfer of money with regards to intellectual property. The second portion was then signed later on when the cooperation agreement had sorted out. So I think basically this challenge to get something done, to get us back on the road, to get the partnership going again, was a very interesting and worthwhile challenge to undertake. The greatest achievement in my presidency, I believe, was the establishment of the clinical priority programs in research. This began as a challenge in either my last academic council meeting as president-elect or as my first one as president, where the foundation was challenged by certain individuals that our research was no longer clinically significant. So I took it upon myself to try to come up with a plan or a program which could reunite the clinicians with the scientists to work on clinically relevant problems. And out of this developed the clinical priority programs.
Well, for me, and it was different from what I had actually expected, that was the relationship between AO and our industrial partners, Synthese. That was not easy every day. The day-to-day, we had a lot of discussions, and the relationship was not as natural as I had expected before my presidency. So this was a real challenge, but we managed. Well, actually, there were two. One was the establishment of AO Trauma, which was a big revolution for the organization, of course. But the real highlight was actually the celebration of our 50 years jubilee, because I had the luck and the honor to be president during these celebrations. And this took us a lot of time and effort, but the final result was really good. And everybody remembers this wonderful event. And wherever I come, people come to me and say, "Oh, remember all these celebrations." So this was great, that they had the opportunity to be there at just exact on the good time. Yes.
The greatest challenge was dealing with the growing pains that we had with AO Trauma and the reorganization that was going on within that division. We began to learn more about ourselves, more about what we needed for the future, and we came out of it, I think, finally much better aware of each other's needs. The second issue was budget. During my presidency, we began to realize that we don't have an unlimited budget. We can't just keep increasing the amount of spending that we do, and we had to begin to prioritize and learn to adhere to certain principles. And this is the first time, I think, that we've ever had that challenge within the AO Foundation. I think the greatest achievement was that a subspecialty representative could rise to be a president. In the history of the AO Foundation, there has never been a subspecialty person who's been a president. And being from craniomaxillofacial surgery, I was particularly honored to be president. The second thing is we began to deal with issues of governance that I think will affect us for the next 50 years. The relationship of the CEO, the management staff, the clinical divisions, and we set forward some principles that I think will continue to be organized and implemented.
There are many big challenges during my presidency. One of them is the election of the new CEO and chairperson of the AOVA, Rolf Jäger. Another one was the changes of the bylaws. And the last one, but also very, very important for our foundation, was to react to the merger of Synthese and J&J. I think that is for our foundation for the future very important. When I took over my presidency in 2010, the new clinical divisions and the foundations were looking for their place, roles and functions. Sometimes it was not clear that all new organizations were striving for the benefit of the overall organization. That means for the AO Foundation. But after 2 years, I'm convinced that everybody is still sitting in the same boat and all are acting in concert, heading in the same direction and to the same destination. That means always solving clinical problems in order to improve patient care and strengthen our foundation.